Hi, Dan. Well, you're joining me fresh off a morning at City Hall with the mayor talking about park board, one of his favorite topics since being
Yeah.
elected. What did you learn today?
Well, today was kind of a presentation with a bit of an update on where the park board transition team is at with this sort of work to dissolve the elected park board and bring parks and recreation under the control of city council to make Vancouver parks would operate, much more like just about every other city in Canada. Vancouver obviously is unique, having a city with this elected body that oversees parks and recreation. So today was just kind of an update for the media. The mayor was there, most of the ABC city councilors, members of the ABC's park board commissioners, and members of this transition team, city manager, and a bunch of senior city staff. And they were kind of just explaining where they're at. They've been doing this work to sort of try to figure out how the park board transition can work. And, obviously at the end of the day, this is a change that would need to be made by the provincial government. The city has made that formal request to the province to change the Vancouver Charter to abolish the elected park board. But the province had kind of said that there was a bunch of work they wanted the city to do. And so that's what we heard today was that, this is now the city has done its homework and has got its stuff organized, and the ball is in the province's court. So,
Okay. One of the things that the Premier Eby at the time said was that he wanted the city to consult with First Nations.
yeah.
So where are they at with that part of the process?
It, I it sounds like it's still an ongoing piece of it. Now, Chief Wayne Sparrow from Musqueam First Nation was there today on stage alongside everyone else, as was Calcillum, the elected chair of the Squamish First Nation Council. So they were both there, appearing on stage with the mayor, speaking about their desire to continue this process and work collaboratively. I don't know that there's been a finalized agreement or something with the nations, but they were there to express their support for sort of continuing this process and continuing to collaborate with the city and the province and their obligations under the DRIPA, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act. So it sounds like that's kind of an ongoing piece.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's ongoing. But it sounds like, like I say, obviously it seems significant that Chief Sparrow and Chairperson Kelsalem were there at City Hall today in person.
Yeah, that sounds like they're supportive of at least the process. Whether
Yeah.
whether they get what they want out of it, I guess we're still waiting to see. Did they say anything in that regard? Like what are they looking for from this
Nothing
process?
specific. But it's basically, the city has said that they'll be continuing engagement with the local First Nations, and that will, I
Are
guess,
they looking for co-management of parks? Or they, do we
there's
have
nothing specific at all about we don't know. They just
Huh,
nothing specific.
okay. There's a staff report going to council on this as well, sir?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, not to get into the weeds on it, we had some reporting last night from the report about a staff estimate that the city could save $7 million a year with the transition.
Yes.
Was that discussed by the mayor
Yes.
or
Oh, yeah,
others today?
definitely. Yeah, that was kind of one of the headlines that I think the mayor wanted to emphasize is that saved money. And that's, his emphasis is that that's money being saved not by cutting existing services, not by reducing community center hours or laying off field maintenance staff or something like that, or closing down some playing fields, or that's not money saved by cuts. That's money saved by efficiency. So providing the same services, or he argues better services, but more efficiently without, this duplication of services. There's all kinds of delays, they were saying, by having two different entities that are responsible and need to work with each other. And these are delays, they need to upgrade a pump station or underground infrastructure. And if something goes between city land and park board land, it creates the requirement for complicated, lengthy negotiations between these different bodies. And again, it's just a situation that doesn't exist in Burnaby or Surrey or North Van or Richmond. It's unique to Vancouver. And they're saying that just these delays on their own can basically add millions and millions of dollars, can cost millions of dollars for taxpayers. So that's kind of what they're really emphasizing. And the mayor did say his idea is that money, those savings, could be invested in parks and not put towards other priorities or whatever, but could go towards parks and making parks and public space and recreation better for the people of Vancouver, people who live and visit here.
Okay. All right. So what did he leave you with any kind of next steps, what they're doing or how far along they're in the process? Because I think when he first announced this, his expectation was that this would all have been over.
Yes.
The legislation would have been introduced before the last provincial election last month.
So that's obviously the timeline has been a bit of a moving target. When Mayor Sim announced this in December, he said at that time that he expected it would take a few months. I think he might have said 6 months, which would have basically meant spring of 2024. That was his initial expectation based on the conversations they had at that time with the province, I guess. And then in March of this year, the premier came out and Premier Eby said that basically change was not going to happen before the next provincial election. But at that time, Premier Eby said he was committed to, following through with the city's request in the next legislative session after the provincial election, if his party formed a government. Now, of course, basically just right now, this week, last week, we've got a new provincial government being sworn in, cabinet being sworn in this week. But more, but just before the election, last month, when he was a candidate, Eby said at a public all candidates meeting that he thought it was very unlikely that abolishing the park board was going to be a priority for his provincial government before the next municipal election, which is in 2026. So that seems to have suggested a timeline had changed in the premier's mind. But today, when asked about that today, Ken Sim said he is still confident. He's still expecting the premier and the province to follow through on making this change happen in the next legislative session, so in the spring. And so obviously the timing is, I guess, still a bit of a question mark, but because of what the premier said last month. So, and what the premier said last month was that he thought it was unlikely that this was going to be a big priority before the next municipal election 2 years from now. But he kind of said that the province has given the city a long list, sort of homework, a bunch of stuff to work on and come back with. And so what we heard today from Councillor Sarah Kirby-Young, who is a former park board commissioner, I think former chair herself as well, she said, today's update, this staff report, this represents the city now having done that work that the province had asked for. In their view, this is what the province wanted. The city has done its part. They've ticked off those to-dos and taken care of that business. And effectively, they're saying now the city's done everything it needs to do. Now it's in the ball is in the province's court to make this happen. So see what happens next.
Both John Rustad and the Greens have said they would prefer a referendum in 2026, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to do the legislative math, I think it's very interesting. So the NDP has 47 seats, the Conservatives 44, and the Greens 2. So it's 47-46, but Christine Boyle, as a city councillor, opposed abolishing the park board, right? So if she voted contrary to Eby's wishes, it wouldn't pass if he did try to bring a bill like that forward.
Or another, potentially. And another newly minted cabinet minister, Spencer Chandler Herbert, a former park board commissioner in Vancouver. He also, before the provincial election, had spoken, shared his support for the elected park board. So that's
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
And so now, I mean, obviously things could change, but yeah, it is and again, it would the leader of the Greens, Anya First-Now, had spoken about, argued in favor of having a referendum in the in a general election like in 2026. I don't know how these two specific Green MLAs feel about. I don't know how high on their radar it is, the Vancouver Park Board, right? The province obviously has a lot of big challenging issues they're dealing with at a provincial level. I don't know how big a thing this is for them, right? It's hard to know. But obviously it's a big deal to the mayor and to the city and the mayor's party. They're obviously, it's a significant focus for them, and they're saying it would be a big improvement for the people of Vancouver. But obviously now it's just, they're saying now the ball is in the province's court. So we see what happens there.
Well, politically speaking, whether he agrees with it or not, I cannot imagine EB wanting to take on something that is potentially caucus divisive issue like this for him. There's no upside for him, as far as I can see. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's why I think he started backing away before the election as well. He had signaled much earlier on when the mayor first announced this that, yep, we want to do what the mayor wants to do, but he's been consistently backing further and further away from this.
Yeah, I guess it's still a matter of time. I mean, this is a formal request of the majority of city council. So I guess the province has to look at it, but I don't. They are the senior government, and it's up to them what they do and when. Right. So the timing of today's press conference is interesting. Obviously, it kind of seems like, this is the first big ask that Vancouver's council majority and the mayor's office want to sort of publicly make of the province. Seems like this is a big priority for them. So
right. That's interesting. Well, and you wrote recently about how if they wanted to, of course, the city could hold a referendum on the park board in the upcoming by-election this spring.
Yeah, and interestingly, it seems like they could do that. We confirmed with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs if they wanted to, it would be up to the discretion of council to potentially include either a binding referendum question or a non-binding plebiscite question, because we're going to be having a by-election anyway to fill the seat vacated by Christine Boyle. So, yeah, they could tack on a referendum question there about the future of the park board. But interestingly, neither side of this debate seems to want that. So last week when I wrote that column, we asked the mayor's office about it. The mayor declined to comment one way or the other, but it did come up. The question came up at this morning's press conference, and the mayor sort of said, look, we've been elected with a mandate to run the city in the way we think is best. And so he did not seem to express support for the idea of putting the question to voters in a by-election. But then at the same time, some of the park board's staunchest defenders, including, some of the current commissioners who want to save the elected board, some of the association, the presidents of community centers who are in favor of saving the board, and this whole Save Our Park Board coalition, a bunch of members of the public, past park board commissioners, as well as, Green Councillor Adrienne Carr, who has, she's opposed to the mayor's plan. A lot of those people also don't like the idea of putting the question to voters in a by-election, specifically for the reason that by-elections often have a very low turnout, and they thought that the question is kind of too important, too complicated to be weighed in what could be a pretty low turnout and relatively low information kind of by-election. A lot of those folks like the idea of putting the question to voters in the next general election, which would be 2026, and a bigger turnout, more information, more of an opportunity for sort of thorough debate around, what's a fairly significant change for Vancouver. And, I definitely, from my perspective, I hear lots of support for both sides of this. A lot of people say we shouldn't be getting rid of, a democratically elected body. I also hear from people who say they're not very happy with the status quo, and they feel like Vancouver Parks could be run better. And why do we need to be the only city that has this elected body? Parks seem to work well in other cities. So I do hear both sides of this. There's been opinion polling about this question for a long time, since, back before Mayor Sim announced this idea. One other thing that's interesting, actually, speaking about, before Mayor Sim announcing this idea almost 12 months ago, he mentioned the idea of previous mayors and previous Vancouver administrations wanting to do this but never taking it on. He said because they didn't have the political will to do this, or the desire to make this happen. And so today's press release did include quotes of showing support from some former Vancouver mayors, Larry Campbell and Mike Harcourt.
Well, that's interesting. So people who are not even necessarily politically aligned with Ken Sim.
No, and as you might imagine, he wanted to make he emphasized that point. He said this is not a right wing or a left wing kind of thing. And sorry, he also had former mayor and former premier Gordon Campbell. So, so 3 different former mayors, including 2 Campbells among them, speaking in favor of this transition. So, and again, from pretty different parts of the political spectrum.
Well, the most recent mayor, Kennedy Stewart, though, noticeably absent from that list, I take it.
Yeah, I don't know if they reached out to Kennedy. I'm not sure.
Right. Well, that's an interesting argument, that because it's a low voter turnout, which would probably be, I guess, historically around 12%, maybe somewhere quite low.
I think the last by election was about 11%. Yeah.
To use that logic, though, I mean, even a general election, only 36% of people turned out in 2022. So how legitimate is that vote for either side? I don't know if you can really, to take that logic, you could say that nobody has legitimacy, including Adrian Carr or Ken Sim on council, when so few people vote, right? So it's a very, very low turnout.
Well, what do they say? Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other ones that have been tried. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the perfect. Yeah.
Oh, it's too bad that they won't go for the referendum. I would, even if they could technically do it as a non-binding one if they wanted to, I guess.
They could.
As well, just
they could
get the pulse of the city, but I don't know what the value of that would be. All right.
They did with the Olympics, I guess, right? When Larry Campbell was mayor, they had it was a plebiscite on the idea of hosting the Olympics.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So are you expecting to hear more from the mayor about this? Is he going to be beating the drum?
It seems to be a big priority for him. I mean, he's obviously this event at City Hall was a big, well-attended event with, like I say, elected officials, community members, representatives of 2 of the 3 local First Nations, and a lot of, senior city staff were there, just kind of on hand. The general manager of community services, the head of engineering I saw was there, the city manager was there. So it's kind of like, and they weren't even speaking or anything. They were just kind of there. So it does seem to be a big deal and a big priority. Like I say, to my mind, it sends a bit of a message. If this is kind of cabinets being sworn in this week, you've got a new provincial government kind of just getting organized, and this is the issue that, the mayor has chosen to sort of come out, and this is the first public, I don't know what they're saying. Publicly, this is what he's saying is a big priority for Vancouver. They want to get this through.
All right. Well, we'll be watching your reporting in the coming days and weeks on this one. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I think there'll be more to come. It'll come to council next week, and just a report for information, and then I guess we'll see. But to hear the mayor say it, it's up to the province now, and they think the city's done what they need to do.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.